A column of U.S. armored vehicles rolled through the heart of the Iraqi capital earlier on Tuesday, and the U.S. Marines raided the Palestine Hotel, which is housing most of the journalists. For more on these developments, we turn now to Michael Holmes, who is in Baghdad. Michael.
Fionnuala, hello to you. I can tell you, first of all, two massive explosions in the distance southeast of our position here. What they were, we do not know, but two big clouds of smoke rising from those areas. What they were, we don't know. They were louder than the demolition charges we've been hearing in recent days as stocks of ammunition and the like have been destroyed. These were certainly serious bombs. We'll try to find out what that was about. The raid that you mentioned woke journalists from their slumber a little after 8 a.m. local time. It's now mid.
All right, well, we're going to leave you, Michael, because while we can hear you, I'm afraid we're not able to see you as well as we would like to, so we'll try to go back to you just as soon as we can. Well, as fighting appears to be winding down in Iraq, the Bush administration is turning up the pressure on Syria. Washington accusing Syria of harboring former Iraqi leaders and of developing chemical weapons. Syria denies the allegations. From Damascus, Sheila McVicker reports.
There is a steady drumbeat.
First things first, we're here in Iraq now, and the second thing about Syria is that we expect cooperation, and I'm hopeful we'll receive cooperation.
We have seen chemical weapons tests in Syria over the past 12, 15 months, and second, that we have intelligence that shows that Syria has allowed Syrians and others to come across the border into Iraq.
I would expect that Syrian authorities would do everything they could not to provide these people a safe haven.
A litany of allegations and accusations that on the streets of Damascus leaves people angry and feeling threatened. There's not much in the Syrian newspapers about what the U.S. administration is saying, but Syrians listen to radio and watch TV. We always thought that when the U.S. finished with Iraq, he says, they would start to make accusations against Syria. We are lost, says this man. Why are the Americans treating us like this?
Sometimes they don't know what they want.
Sometimes even the government here seems bewildered by what the U.S. administration says.
We have no problem, I mean, if you give us any sort of evidence. Because if we say to you no, you are not believing us, because this is the third, fourth statement that you are directing against Syria.
Out here in the Syrian desert is the border with Iraq, sealed now, at least officially, after U.S. pressure. The Syrians insist no members of Saddam Hussein's regime have entered Syria, and Western diplomats in Damascus agree, saying the intelligence on which that allegation is apparently based is, quote, dubious.
But there are serious questions, as Britain's Foreign Secretary has said, that will require serious answers. Questions about Syria's covert chemical weapons program, about its continuing support for groups labeled as terrorist organizations like Hamas and Hezbollah. Now that the U.S. administration has the attention of the Syrians, what are they going to ask them to do? Sheila McVicker, CNN, Damascus.
Well, speaking in Doha, British Foreign Secretary Jack Straw urged Syria to prove that the allegations made by the United States are unfounded. Tom Mentir is in Doha and joins us now live. Tom.
Fionnuala, the British Foreign Secretary Jack Straw came here to Qatar to meet with his British Air Marshal and with General Tommy Franks. It was a meeting that occurred early this morning, and then he met here with reporters. It wasn't about Iraq that people wanted to talk about. It was about Syria, and the Foreign Secretary said that there needed to be an explanation to several questions and that Syria needed to provide the answers.
Syria's got to understand the seriousness of this situation. My experience of meeting President Bashar and of meeting Foreign Minister Shara is that these are intelligent people who have the future interest and welfare of their country at heart.
It is the issue of the possibility that members of Saddam Hussein's regime have made their way to Damascus and elsewhere, a charge that has been made several times in the last few days. Richard Murphy is a former U.S. ambassador to Syria. He says that there is a rich history in this part of the world for offering sanctuary.
There's also, remember, a very strong tradition throughout this region of sanctuary, and that's what has to be resolved. To the extent there are leading members of the Ba'ath from Iraq, from the family of Saddam Hussein, they've come claiming sanctuary, and Syria has to resolve how hot they are to handle and how much to honor the old traditions of giving sanctuary.
There is a list of 55 members of the regime of Saddam Hussein. There have been a couple names that have been taken off the list or out of the deck of cards, as they like to say here. But all attention here is now focused on a meeting in Nasiriyah today of what may be the future of Iraq, the beginnings of the formation of the next government. It is just the first in a series of meetings, but it is the first to take place inside Iraq. Several members have already said they're boycotting the meeting. They don't want to follow down this blueprint, saying that the U.S. is setting this up, but we'll have to wait and see how this first meeting goes that's currently underway right now. Fionnuala?
All right, Tom and Tir in Doha. Now, we were talking to Michael Holmes in Baghdad a few moments ago. Let's go back to him. Michael.
Yeah, Fionnuala, I think before the technical difficulties, we were starting to tell you about that raid that took place this morning about 8 a.m. local time. It's now just after midday. A fairly frightening little experience for the journalists, and there are 2,500 of them here at the Palestine Hotel. On the 17th floor, many CNN staff, reporters, producers, cameramen, were awoken by bashing on the door, shouts to open the door. When the doors were opened, they were forced to lie on the ground at gunpoint by US troops. Some were masked, some were not. Their credentials were checked. In some cases, they were physically searched. They were told to remain in their rooms. Some had soldiers posted outside their rooms to ensure that they did so. We did manage to get some pictures, however, as you can see. I spoke to a military source, and he told me, and I can actually quote him here, he said, "We were looking for people who are not friendly to the United States and who we strongly suspect are in the hotel." Another source said, "We were looking for unauthorized weapons." I spoke to a CNN cameraman who said he asked what was going on and was told by a US soldier, "We're looking for bad guys with guns." So fairly dramatic scene here. Now what has happened since then is also interesting. There is a palpable and demonstrable increase in security around here. We've heard several large explosions in the distance. I don't know if you heard that one just then. But around the hotel itself, there is obviously a concern among US forces, intelligence aspects of the forces, that there are people in this hotel who do not have good intentions. And although there was a perimeter around this hotel, it has now been increased. We're seeing troops down below us patrolling, not as they have been with cans of Coke in their hands or whatever, but with their weapons at the ready. And outside the hotel, razor wire is being set up in parts that we have not seen before, and people are being prevented from coming in. One of our camera crews went down to ground level to try to get some pictures, and they were told by Marines not to film because there were fears it would incite the crowd. And there is the daily crowd gathering here, hundreds of people in fact, and the usual chants of "Down, Down, USA." These demonstrations have been daily affairs. They are getting slightly bigger, although you still wouldn't call them massive demonstrations. And I suppose it can be argued that what people are doing are venting, they're expressing their opinions, which is something they couldn't do under Saddam Hussein. So far, these demonstrations have been peaceful, if at times angry and certainly vocal. And just to recap what they're complaining about, chiefly it has been looting, the lack of security in the city, the breakdown of law and order, what has in past days been near chaos in parts of the city. That's toned down slightly, but they're also complaining that the power's still not on. Telephone system does not work. There are long queues at those shops that have dared to open their doors. Many people still not willing to go back to work because they're staying at home to protect their homes from those looters. And there are still fires burning around the city too. The library went up in smoke yesterday. It is still burning, and I counted half a dozen fires just to the north of the city, within the city limits. Big fires too, Fionnuala.
All right, Michael, so between this raid on the hotel and the hotel itself being a focus for the citizens of Baghdad to vent their frustration, how secure overall is the city for US Marines? Have they managed to get it completely under their control, or are there pockets of resistance still?
Still very much pockets of resistance. It was only a little over 24 hours ago that there was a big firefight here near the hotel with US Marines opening up on some men with Kalashnikovs, AK-47s. There is still a lot of noise of combat around. Last evening, at least 6 tank rounds were fired from positions near here, one of them literally rattling the windows of our hotel, and there was at least one airstrike that we believe was an airstrike from the sound of it inside Baghdad. And these explosions that I described to you earlier around Baghdad, what is lessened today is isolated gunshots. We hear a lot of M16 shots during the day normally, haven't heard those today. And there is still a lot of security around the city. We ventured out yesterday to go to a specific location and were turned around by US Marines who said that particular area of the city had not been cleared, in their words. Fionnuala.
All right, Michael Holmes in Baghdad. Well, despite that, coalition commanders say the combat in Iraq is now essentially limited to their move into Tikrit. Time magazine correspondent Michael Ware is with US Marines there and gave us this update earlier.
The few people who remained in the city of Tikrit came out to watch the American advance into the city, but the reception was less than welcoming. Some people waved from the sides of the road, other people asked for water or complained that there was no power. However, strong feelings remain. When I was in the headquarters of the Ba'ath Party in Tikrit, I was exploring some rooms and found some Iraqi flags. As I held them in my hands, a Tikriti came over to me and snatched them away. He then kissed the flag, stared at me and said, "Saddam good."
Well, with the Marines now in Tikrit, US military officials say major combat operations are over. Correspondent Patty Davis has details now from the Pentagon.
Cobra helicopters swooped above as U.S. Marines moved into Saddam Hussein's hometown of Tikrit, north of Baghdad. They had expected Iraqi fighters to mount a last stand here, but instead encountered only a few sharp firefights and little problems securing the presidential palace.
There was less resistance than we anticipated. We certainly knew that there was an area that was very important to the regime leadership.
With Saddam Hussein's regime dismantled, U.S. troops worked with Iraqi police to restore order in Baghdad and other cities. But the Pentagon isn't declaring victory yet.
I would anticipate that the major combat engagements are over because the major Iraqi units on the ground cease to show coherence.
The air campaign is now phasing out. Some F-117s and B-2 stealth bombers have been sent home. Air missions have dropped to 700 to 800 per day, less than half their highest level. The Pentagon said 2 aircraft carrier battle groups, the USS Kitty Hawk and the USS Constellation, will leave the Persian Gulf within days. So far, there's no plan to pull ground troops who continue to face danger from snipers, renegade remnants of the Republican Guard, and suicide bombers. With combat winding down, the hunt for weapons of mass destruction is ratcheting up. So far, though, no confirmed finds.
We don't have positive or negative either way. We have gone to some of the major sites, as I said, and in fact shipped samples back to the United States for detailed analysis.
And the hunt for Saddam Hussein and other Iraqi officials remains a top priority. Also a top priority, finding the 4 Americans still unaccounted for. Patty Davis, CNN, the Pentagon.
After the break, a look at the Shiite majority and their possible role in the leadership of post-Saddam Iraq. Stay with us.
Fearing factionalism.
Hey, I'll get this. Besides, I get airline miles. With your business card? Huh.
What is your credit card doing for your small business?
You earn miles on everything you buy? Yeah, from supplies to travel expenses.
The Citi Platinum Select Advantage Business Card. Call now and you could get 1 mile for every $1 you spend. Miles that may never expire, plus 10,000 bonus miles.
I use my miles for car rentals, hotels, on over 25 top airlines, even a well-earned vacation.
Plus, get benefits like account summaries, business discounts, online fraud protection, and more. Call now to request your card.
I'd like the Citi Advantage Business Card and 10,000 bonus miles.
And soon, your miles could take you almost anywhere.
Oh, Paris is great. And flying free? Makes it even better. Smart business decision.
the Citi Advantage Business Card.
Call now to request your card and 10,000 bonus miles.
Welcome back. Now the latest developments. In Baghdad, a crowd stages a demonstration calling for law and order in the Iraqi capital. Coalition commanders acknowledge looting in Baghdad has not been completely eliminated, but they say it appears to have eased. The US says it will work with international agencies to secure Baghdad museums and recover or restore stolen or broken antiquities. The Bush administration is accusing Syria of developing chemical weapons, supporting terror groups, and giving safe harbor to Iraqi leaders. Damascus denies it has chemical weapons and says it never cooperated with Saddam's regime. Western diplomats in Damascus say the allegations that senior officials of Saddam's government have entered Syria are based on dubious intelligence. But British Foreign Secretary Jack Straw says the US and Britain want Syria to provide the fullest possible cooperation. Well, opposition leaders are meeting in the southern city of Nasiriyah to discuss a future government for Iraq. It is the first time in a series of US-sponsored meetings. With me now to discuss this as well as other issues is Dan Plesh from the Royal United Services Institute. Dan, they appear to have the work cut out for them.
They certainly do. I think the situation in Iraq remains extremely unstable, and the one organization which is taking steps are, of course, the mosques, who are working very effectively to fill that vacuum.
And is it too soon to begin these kind of meetings if the country is so unstable?
No, I think it's probably not soon enough. But there is a big question as to how far one should be working with the expatriate community and, as we've seen, the police forces of Saddam's regime. The key is to draw in the unpoliticized, non-Ba'ath Party professional classes and many people out in the country in the tribal areas. These seem to be the two key constituencies, and that unfortunately some of the expatriate groups and the expatriate military trained by the Americans don't necessarily seem to be improving the situation.
Because?
Well, there were some reports last week that they were already terrorizing people in the town of Najaf, going around saying, "We're with the Americans, we're in American military vehicles, we can do what we like, give me your car, give me your valuables." Well, that, of course, is the last thing that one wants to see. And the use of the former regime's police, because the United States military doesn't want to take on the policing role itself, for understandable reasons, puts it in the position, as it were, of starting denazification by rehiring the Gestapo.
So how much groundwork can be done by American officials in the run-up to this meeting, perhaps only with the expatriate community?
Well, I think hopefully quite a lot, but there's, I think, a boycott already on by some of the Shia community, and I think that the question is already being asked. Well, seeing these demonstrations, no doubt, well, has to say organised by whom, but organised by somebody outside the hotel where the journalists are in Baghdad, essentially saying, "Yankee, go home. Well, you've got rid of Saddam. What are you still doing here?"
So where to begin if you were Jay Garner?
Well, that's a very large question for
that one to you.
But I suppose one might say I might not start from here. But I think it's really a priority on indigenous Iraqis who aren't people with a record in the Ba'ath Party.
And so basically that means having to go back right to the beginning, because it's going to be very hard to find people going back through records that Iraq.
Well, yes, but I mean, obviously there are mid-level people in the non-security service ministries who I'm sure would have a great ability to contribute and were, as it were, pro forma members of the party. But I think there are also an awful lot of people in business, in the professions and so on, who didn't have a record in the party and could be drawn upon.
So this almost has to happen on at least two different tracks, because unless there is civil law and order within the major cities and towns of Iraq, it's going to be impossible to try and establish some constitutional form of authority.
Yes, and from the outside it's hard to tell, but the impression is given that this looting and so on is entirely random. It may well actually be part of an organised attempt to destabilise the situation, and one I think the American military, the coalition military, have also to be concerned about whether there is a regrouping of an attempt to carry out guerrilla war. I think we heard in one of the recent reports this morning of airstrikes again in Baghdad, and many of the areas once heard from US forces they haven't been in simply because they can't get their tanks down the streets, and they don't want to send out foot patrols because every Iraqi's got an AK-47, and quite a lot of them wouldn't actually welcome Americans coming down the street, Saddam or no Saddam.
All right, well, a tall order indeed. Thank you very much indeed. Dan Flesh. Well, in the running to establish a leadership for the new Iraq, the country's Shiite majority is trying to show a united front. Earlier, we spoke with Amir Tahiri, a Middle East political analyst, on tensions between the Shiites and between Shiites and Iraq's Sunni minority.
This is really the most important question in Iraq at the moment, is how not to antagonize the traditional ruling elite, who are Sunnis, who are a minority numerically speaking, and bring in the Shiites who don't have an experience of government but who are numerically in a majority, and doing all that without antagonizing the Kurds who stand between the two.
In Najaf, tensions are simmering, and since the fall of the government, many Iraqis have been searching prisons for relatives. Lindsay Hilsum has some of their stories.
Fearing factionalism will rob them of power in the new Iraq, thousands of Shia Muslims poured onto the streets of their holiest city, proclaiming unity. We came to deny these rumours that there is infighting among the Shiites, he says. Are these rumours true, he asked the crowd. No, they reply. This was his return after 15 years exile in Syria, plunging into the charged atmosphere in Najaf, where the abrupt end of Saddam's repression of Iraq's majority Shia community is triggering power plays among its leading clerics. Intrigue no one wants to talk about.
Am I right in what I said, that there is tension there?
I don't know. Now I can't tell you, because I see somebody look to me and see me, and this is not good for me. I suggest that this is
but
good
I'm
for
right.
you.
But I'm right, yes?
Yeah.
I am right.
I think, yeah. I'm sure, not just I think. Okay?
Rumours mixing with fact, an explosive combination. A few days ago, leading Shiite cleric Abdul Majid al-Khoui, returning from exile in London, was murdered here with a colleague. In this quiet house, a cleric describes the death in detail, denies rumours his faction was involved, but makes clear his movement, led by Muqtada al-Sadr, has the best rationale for dominance.
The Shiites are united behind al-Sadr because he's walking in the footsteps of his father. He is an Iraqi.
Others in this house, who say they are from different factions, emphasize the importance of Shia unity. All want a Shia religious leader running the country and blame outsiders for dividing them.
Americans are not honest with us. We don't know their true intentions. They are allying themselves with one or two groups among the Shiites.
At the ornate Imam Ali Shrine, the holiest place for the Shia, few doubt America's responsibility to provide security. And privately, several top Shia clerics feared talking frankly about the festering factional tensions, lest they exacerbate the problem. In this historic city, intrigue is nothing new for its residents. For the occupying US troops, dealing with it will be. Nick Robertson, CNN, Najaf, Iraq.
Reporting on tensions within the Shiite community. But since the fall of the government, many Iraqis have been searching prisons for relatives, and Lindsay Hilsum now reports on that.
The colonel had been waiting a long time for this moment. He had spent 5 years in Abu Ghraib prison, and today he came to get his revenge. He was part of a work gang forced to build and paint the mural.
It's personal. I came to wash away the shame. I took part in building this wall.
I was a political prisoner in this jail. Some people criticized me and asked, how could you have participated in building a mural to this oppressor? We were political prisoners from every part of society, Arabs, Kurds, Sunnis, Shia, Turkmen, everyone.
The cells of Abu Ghraib have been ransacked, looting and revenge. This was one of the most notorious of Saddam Hussein's prisons. The colonel said he had been part of a secret anti-Saddam organization within the military, but he wouldn't say exactly what he'd been charged with. Thousands of political detainees, as well as ordinary criminals, passed through here. Many never emerged. The records have been scattered and destroyed. But people come here every day seeking the truth about what really happened in Abu Ghraib. Karim Jali Hashem knows what happened to his two brothers. He wants to find those who did it.
The execution committee had my brother slaughtered with a knife. They did executions on Saturdays and Tuesdays. They would execute 10 to 15 people, or sometimes as many as 25 in a day.
He and the colonel took us to see the morgue. Karim says he was told, go and find your brothers there. They were lying in a pile of 50 stinking bodies. Their main crime appears to have been insulting Saddam Hussein's son, Uday. Outside the gallows chamber,
my big brother was hanged with a rope like this. My younger brother, they cut his throat with a knife.
the colonel was calm and determined. When we first met Karim, he was weeping. By now, he just wanted to make sure we saw everything, even the gallows, to make sure that we understood how truly terrible was this place where his brothers had been killed. Once condemned, they slept 15 to a cell, each man knowing he was going to die. Afterwards, unclaimed bodies were buried in numbered graves. Others returned to their grieving families. There's nothing left here. No evidence that will lead Karim to his brother's killers. Just the echoes of the victims of Saddam Hussein.
That report from Lindsay Hilsum in Baghdad. And stay with CNN's coverage of Iraq just ahead. We'll update the latest developments, plus the role of the United Nations in Iraq. Secretary General Kofi Annan meets European Union leaders, seeking to forge consensus on the issue. Stay with us.
CNN takes you into the whole story.
But how much fighting still remains? And is Saddam himself dead or alive?
No one gets you closer than CNN, the most trusted name in news.
Hey, I'll get this. Besides, I get airline miles. With your business card? Huh.
What is your credit card doing for your small business?
You earn miles on everything you buy? Yeah, from supplies to travel expenses.
The Citi Platinum Select Advantage Business Card. Call now and you could get 1 mile for every $1 you spend. Miles that may never expire. Plus 10,000 bonus miles.
I use my miles for car rentals, hotels, on over 25 top airlines, even a well-earned vacation.
Plus, get benefits like account summaries, business discounts, online fraud protection, and more. Call now to request your card.
I'd like the Citi Advantage Business Card and 10,000 bonus miles.
And soon, your miles could take you almost anywhere.
Oh, Paris is great. And flying free? Makes it even better. Smart business decision.
The Citi Advantage Business Card.
Call now to request your card and 10,000 bonus miles.
CNN, the most trusted name in news.
Recapping the latest developments, Syria's government is coming under increasing pressure from the United States and Britain. Washington says Damascus has given safe haven to fleeing Iraqi officials. It also accuses Syria of developing chemical arms, charges Syria strongly denies. Britain's Foreign Secretary has also weighed in on the issue.
Syria's got to understand the seriousness of this situation. My experience of meeting President Bashar and of meeting Foreign Minister Shara is that these are intelligent people who have the future interest and welfare of their country at heart. Given the changed reality, given what they have said about the years of enmity between their brand of the Ba'athist Party and the Iraqi brand of the Ba'athist Party, seems to me it shouldn't be too difficult for the Syrian government actively to cooperate with the United States and the United Kingdom, and we look forward to that cooperation.
Iraqi opposition leaders are meeting in southern Iraq Tuesday to discuss Iraq's future. Senior U.S. officials say the session is one of many planned to help forge a post-Saddam administration. But a main Shiite opposition group is threatening to boycott the meeting. With U.S. troops and tanks now firmly in control of most of Tikrit, the Pentagon says all-out combat in Iraq is pretty much at an end. The U.S. Navy is already scaling back from the Gulf region, but U.S. military officials warn pockets of resistance could still erupt. Witnesses say Iraq's capital is still plagued by scattered looting and other signs of unrest, and there are signs residents are fed up. Some held a demonstration calling for the return of law and order. Iraqi police and U.S. Marines have begun joint patrols. That, as U.S. military sources tell CNN's Michael Holmes, the Marines are being replaced by U.S. Army units. UN Secretary General Kofi Annan is making his way to Athens, where he'll meet leaders from major European countries. On their agenda, what political role the United Nations will play in post-war Iraq. Kitty Pilgrim reports.
The camouflage helmets did the heavy fighting to liberate Iraq, but now some are arguing for the blue helmets to take over. But Secretary of State Colin Powell says it's not so simple.
The United States is not mad at the United Nations. We believe they have a role to play. But at the same time, it was this coalition of nations that was willing to put its treasure at risk.
The U.S. military is already doing the initial humanitarian work through its civil affairs units. Food, equipment, hospital supplies are moving in, and the coalition has reestablished the water supply to cities in the south. U.S. forces are patrolling the streets and helping to establish order in major cities. And Iraqi policemen are showing up to form joint police patrols with the U.S. troops. That, says Prime Minister Tony Blair, is how it should evolve. The coalition has said from the beginning that Iraqis should step up to take charge.
Iraq is a nation with a creative people, potentially wealthy, with a dynamic and prosperous future ahead of it. They don't need to be run from the outside by the US, the UK, or the UN, and they won't be.
France, Russia, and Germany are angling for a role, holding a mini-summit this past weekend in St. Petersburg. Some oppose UN involvement at all. Iraqi opposition leader Ahmed Shalabi said, quote, "I don't think the United Nations would be able to play a central role in Iraq. It became a de facto ally of Saddam Hussein," unquote. Adding France and Germany, because of their opposition to the war, were, quote, "badly regarded in Iraq," unquote.
President Bush and Prime Minister Tony Blair have called for the UN to fill a vital role in post-war Iraq, but by no means the primary one. The success of the coalition, with little help from the United Nations, gives considerable weight to that assessment. Kitty Pilgrim, CNN, New York.
The future of Iraq is only one issue on the agenda for the Athens summit. Robin Oakley reports on how the issues raised by European Union expansion.
In November 1989, the Berlin Wall came down. Soviet domination of Eastern Europe ended. As crowds celebrated, Europe's politicians dreamed of expanding the European Union to embrace a whole continent. In Athens this week, the dream becomes a reality. 10 more countries will sign an accession treaty, boosting the EU membership from 15 to 25. Coming in are the Baltic lands of Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. There's Poland, Hungary, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Slovenia, and the 2 Mediterranean islands of Cyprus and Malta. They'll fly their flags and celebrate, but there's some patching up to be done before they all start working together. With the enlargement of the EU happening alongside the war in Iraq, there are real tensions. The US Defense Secretary, for example, likes the ex-communist countries of the new Europe because they signed up to the US war aims on Iraq. Who can forget the Rumsfeld-Schirach transatlantic exchange?
You're thinking of Europe as Germany and France. I don't. I think that's old Europe.
But France's President Jacques Chirac has castigated the new Europe countries as badly brought up for their support of the US. They had, he said, missed a good opportunity to shut up. New members like Hungary, where 84% backed EU entry in a weekend referendum, are tactful but firm.
we can be good Europeans and we can be partisans of more integration within the European Union without this having to go against our relations or Europe's relations with the United States. It's one of the fundamental interests of Europe and the European Union to work together with the United States.
Those sentiments are welcomed by Tony Blair and the UK.
Some want a continentalist Europe, an inward-looking Europe, a Europe that's disconnected from the rest of the world, and particularly the United States. But I don't think that's a majority opinion.
In the new expanded Europe, that view will almost certainly be right, which has led to fears that France and Germany, the leading European voices against an Iraqi war, may try to reassert their dominance by creating an inner core within the expanded EU. Enlargement will add bulk to the European Union. It won't necessarily increase its harmony. Robin Oakley, CNN, London.
The UN Security Council blames the Turkish Cypriot leader for the failure of talks aimed at reunifying the island. UN Secretary General Kofi Annan tried to get Turkish and Greek leaders in Cyprus to accept his plan for reunification. Annan had hoped a reunified Cyprus could sign a treaty on April the 16th. The island would then join the European Union next year. The talks collapsed last month as Turkish Cypriot leader Rauf Denktash rejected the proposal. The head of an international group building 2 nuclear reactors in North Korea says he expects multilateral talks on Pyongyang's suspected nuclear weapons program to begin in less than 2 weeks. The leader of the Korean Peninsula Energy Development Organization also applauded Pyongyang's shift from insisting on strictly bilateral talks with the United States. Meantime, North Korea on Tuesday marked the birthday of its late leader, Kim Il-sung. The nationwide celebration is the biggest holiday in North Korea. Now, for the latest on the SARS virus, and over the weekend, Indonesia, the Philippines and Sweden confirmed their first cases of severe acute respiratory syndrome. Meanwhile, Japan's Ministry of Health announced 4 of the cases it had previously reported to the World Health Organization turned out not to be SARS. The WHO says there are now more than 3,000 cases of the disease worldwide. Out of those, almost 1,500 cases have recovered. It says there have been at least 144 deaths. Well, both Canada and the United States announced they have sequenced the genetic code of the SARS virus. Experts suggest this development could lead to better treatment and perhaps a vaccine. Glenn Van Zutphen has more on the breakthrough.
The announcement made by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in the U.S. is not a cure for SARS, or even close to it, but it is a key step toward understanding the virus.
We are basically 31 days into this investigation, and the fact that we have international collaborators who've not only identified the likely cause of SARS, but also have sequenced the virus and have created a number of laboratory tests that look increasingly promising is a scientific achievement that I don't think has ever been paralleled in our history.
A Canadian laboratory cracked the virus genetic code over the weekend, giving hope to scientists that they were on the right track toward figuring out where it came from and how it might be diagnosed and treated. The CDC sequencing announcement Monday was nearly identical to that of the Canadians and gives medical detectives vital information.
Unfortunately, the clues from comparing it to the animal viruses have not given us any real leads in terms of where did it come from. We can't say it's a mouse virus or a pig virus or any other animal virus necessarily, because it just isn't similar enough to the known species to be able to draw those conclusions. But having this information is critically important for developing even faster diagnostic tests, and certainly should help us in the development of antivirals and vaccine work down the road.
Gerberding also said researchers at 11 labs around the world have been collaborating to identify the cause of SARS and devise treatment. SARS is a never-before-seen strain of the human coronavirus, which also causes the common cold. There is no cure for SARS, only treatment for the flu-like symptoms. The illness appears to have originated in southern China last year and spread to 21 countries so far. The CDC says containment procedures appear to be working in Taiwan, Canada, and the U.S., but they have not stopped the disease from spreading in Hong Kong, China, and Singapore. Despite the sequencing advancements over the past few days, the CDC says it could take up to a year to develop a vaccine for SARS. Glenn Van Zutphen, CNN.
Now stay with CNN's coverage of Iraq after Saddam. Just ahead, we'll update the latest developments. Plus, the museums of Iraq have lost precious artifacts to looters. A look at how to prevent history from repeating itself.
What about Paris?
Why not the Caribbean? How can planning your next trip be even better?
Mexico?
Knowing your trip could be free.
Hawaii!
Yay! Call now to request the City Advantage World MasterCard, and you can earn free award travel plus get 8,000 bonus miles. And you can use your miles to fly on over 25 top airlines. You'll earn 1 mile for every dollar you spend on everyday purchases and on special purchases too. Call to request your card and 8,000 bonus miles. Plus, now your miles never expire as long as you make a purchase with your card at least once every 3 years. Soon, you'll be on the trip you planned. Use your miles to fly on over 25 top airlines, stay at the finest hotels worldwide, and drive with any major car rental company free. Call now to request your City Advantage World MasterCard and 8,000 bonus miles, and your next trip to almost anywhere could be free.
Oh, hey, hi, I'm Baker. Don't mind me, I'm just a dermatophyte. You know, a nail infection. All I want is to get in here and live under your nail. You can't get me with clippers or those surface treatments you try on your own. I'm in too deep in your nail bed. I'll make myself comfortable, invite a few friends, settle in.
Do you have thick, discolored, or flaky nails? Millions of people do. It may be caused by an active live infection. That's why you should ask your doctor about prescription-only Lamisil. Unlike surface treatments, Lamisil is a pill that works through the bloodstream to target and attack the infection at its source, underneath the nail. In fact, you can start to see clearer, healthier nails in just 3 months. Lamisil isn't for people with liver or kidney problems. Barely serious side effects in the liver or serious skin reactions have occurred, so your doctor may do blood tests. Other side effects including headache, diarrhea, indigestion, and rash were generally mild. Ask your doctor about Lamisil. It's the #1 brand for treating infected nails. Once daily Lamisil tablets. Get your nail infection where it grows.
Now, the latest developments in Baghdad. A crowd stages a demonstration calling for law and order in the Iraqi capital. Coalition commanders acknowledge looting in Baghdad has not been completely eliminated, but they say it appears to have eased. The U.S. says it will work with international agencies to secure Baghdad museums and recover or restore stolen or broken antiquities. The U.S. is accusing Syria of developing chemical weapons and giving safe harbor to Iraqi leaders. Damascus denies the charges, and Western diplomats in Damascus say the allegations about Iraqi leaders are based on dubious intelligence. However, the British Foreign Secretary Jack Straw says the U.S. and Britain want Syria to provide the fullest possible cooperation. Speaking at Central Command headquarters in Doha, Straw said, quote, "There is an opportunity here for an important new beginning for Syria." The U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell says Washington will work to find objects looted from Iraq's museums and help to restore damaged pieces. Powell's comments follow criticism of Washington for not preventing looters from ransacking the National Museum of Iraq. Speaking earlier in Washington, Powell reinforced the U.S. commitment to finding stolen artifacts.
We were concerned about some of the looting that took place in the museum in Baghdad, one of the great museums in the world. And the United States will be working with a number of individuals and organizations to not only secure the facility, but to recover that which has been taken, and also to participate in restoring that which has been broken.
With so many relics missing, it raises the issue of how Iraq can preserve its historical and cultural identity and how in the future such incidents can be prevented. For more on that, I'm joined by Robert Springborg, Director of the Middle East Centre at the University of London. Robert Springborg, how do the events of the past few days, once Baghdad had thought to be secure, how do they affect you as an historian?
Well, it's very sad indeed, in part because those of us at the London Middle East Institute, in conjunction with archaeologists, art historians, and others throughout the UK had alerted both the Defense Secretary here in Britain and the Secretary of State in the United States to the possibility of this occurrence, and had been assured in writing from the Defense Secretary that all proper account would be taken of the Geneva Accords that calls upon occupying powers to protect cultural properties. And the embassy, the American embassy here, in fact, had forwarded a copy of that letter to the Secretary of State. So we are, and we know other letters of that nature had also reached the Secretary of State of the United States and the Secretary of Defense. So it was not for want of knowledge that this occurred. It seems to me that the proper authorities had been duly informed, and so indeed action should have been taken.
Well, let me ask you, let's clarify this. These artifacts that went missing or were destroyed weren't so much destroyed during the actual combat itself, but in the looting afterwards.
There was some destruction to museums, various museums around Iraq during the fighting, not a great deal. It was structural damage to the buildings. The artifacts, unfortunately, as you suggest, were looted after the guns had fallen more or less silent, and the looting was done by two categories of people: very poor people who were grabbing anything that they could get that had value, gold, diamonds, and so on. And the other category of people were those who were well informed, who knew the value of these antiquities and were going into the vaults themselves to find particular objects. So both of these are evil, maybe the second more evil than the first, because these are people who knew the value of these to Iraq's and indeed to the world's patrimony.
Well, let's talk about the kind of art we're talking about here, the value of it, but also artistically and culturally for Iraq.
Well, Mesopotamia is, in a sense, the seat of world civilization, and some of the artifacts in that museum attest to that long history. Some of the earliest pottery in the world, dating back almost 100,000 years, was there, admittedly in fragments, fragments that are probably lost forever. The history of writing is traced from its rise in Mesopotamia through some of the clay tablets, examples of cuneiform and so on, that are there. Some of the greatest examples of this wonderful art of the Assyrians with the winged lions and so on is also to be found there, as are some of the greatest medieval Islamic manuscripts during the Abbasid period. So this museum is one of the 5 great museums in the world, and that it was not protected bespeaks either of a profound breakdown in communications between the policymakers in Washington and the Defense Department and soldiers in the field, or something else that's quite inexplicable.
I mean, questions are obviously being asked about how this happened, given that you had the guarantees you thought you had. Do you expect that you'll get any answers?
Well, I don't know about answers now. What the Secretary of State is suggesting is the time for action, and the State Department does indeed have a department for the recovery of stolen antiquities, and I'm assuming under the Secretary's orders now that that department will be wheeled into position to begin to track the stolen antiquities and to make very serious contributions to the restoration of the antiquities that are left and looted in Baghdad, Mosul, and so on, or which are recovered.
Of course, Washington can make all the noises it likes, as Secretary of State Colin Powell appears to be doing, in terms of trying to find these lost artifacts. But realistically, it's really about what happens on the ground, and it's the US soldiers really who would be sent out to find these artifacts. I mean, do you have faith that that will actually happen in this current climate?
No, you're absolutely right. The Secretary of State's capacity has to do really with cross-border smuggling, not so much with what happens to artifacts in a country such as Iraq. So it will be the U.S. military, ultimately, that really bears responsibility for this, and they have plenty of other tasks to do. So I fear we are going to lose much of the world's patrimony as architectural, archaeological, and artistic patrimonies as a result of this tragic event.
Robert Springborn, thank you very much indeed.
You're welcome.
Now, let's get an update on what is happening in the business world. We turn to Charles Hodson. Charles.
Thanks, Vanilla. Europe's stock markets are rising on the heels of Wall Street's strong performance on Monday, when the Dow and the Nasdaq each gained nearly 2%. Let's have a look at the latest numbers from the European markets, starting with the London FTSE, which is currently gaining more than 1%. The German DAX is up by nearly 2%. Paris CAC 40 doing a little bit better than that, just above 2%. The gains there. The Zurich SMI 1.25%. Traders giving a cautious welcome to first quarter figures from Philips, one of Europe's biggest technology companies. The Netherlands-based firm managed to deliver a small operating profit amid difficult conditions, as a sharp slide in the dollar's exchange rate dented revenue. Philips also predicted its struggling microchip unit would return to profit in the fourth quarter of 2003. The company's shares are up 4% in Amsterdam. With earnings statements likely to dominate the markets this week, more tech companies are lining up to report on Tuesday. Intel, Microsoft, Texas Instruments and Motorola all released figures after Wall Street's closing bell. Well, our financial editor Todd Benjamin joins me now with a roundup of earnings news and what he makes of the markets. Let's start with the news. We had Citigroup, pretty decent earnings, and IBM not too bad either. What did the markets make of those?
Well, IBM came out after the bell last night, and actually it's up slightly in after-hours trading, because even though it missed its actual number in terms of what it was expected to earn, its revenues were better than expected by about $200 million. I think more importantly, Charles, it reaffirmed it's Wall Street's outlook for the year for IBM in terms of what they're expecting in terms of sales and earnings. And therefore, that was a positive. You just mentioned Philips. You know, Philips being up 4%. It had a slight operating profit, okay, which was a positive. But I think more importantly, what they're saying, even though the fourth quarter is a long ways off, that their microchip unit will then return to profitability. This is what investors want to hear. They want some sort of vindication that all the pain they've suffered will be worth it down the line. I still think the jury's out, but nevertheless, you're seeing Philips rise today.
Does that all bode well for Intel, Motorola, Texas Instruments, and Microsoft when they come out later on Tuesday?
Well, we'll have to see what Microsoft, which of course is the 800-pound gorilla, has to say. We know they've been cautious about the outlook for IT spending. In terms of Intel, they've already given a sales warning. Another interesting aspect for Intel will be what do they plan to do in terms of building plant and equipment? Because the last time around when they announced earnings, they said, hey, by the way, our CapEx budget could be down by as much as 25% this year compared to last year. That was a big blow to those people who supplied the equipment for Intel.
Okay, let's look more broadly at the markets. Is anyone expecting any kind of big gain now that the war is effectively out of the way and all the big objectives have been secured?
Well, you got to remember, as you do, that we've had a big run off the March 12th lows, all right? I think it's going to be tougher for these markets to make significant gains. I think the only thing that really will help these markets at this point is expectations for the first quarter earnings, which are coming out now, have been so low that as long as companies either meet those earnings or perhaps have a pleasant surprise, the market's likely to take that news and run with it.
So essentially, we're not looking at big gains for these markets for a little while yet, then?
I think right now we're pretty much in a trading range, and while the bulls still have the upward bias right now, we're going to have reaffirmation in the economy and the fundamentals that their faith has been proven correct. And at this point, it's very difficult to see some of that. Some of the consumer numbers have been better, but we have to see what business does in terms of spending. And that really hasn't been picking up in a significant way yet. We have to see that.
Todd, thank you very much indeed. Todd Benjamin, our financial editor. That's all from me for now. Todd and I will have more later. Fionnuala,
all right.
To you.
Charles. Iraqis have endured decades of authoritarian rule and weeks of war and distraction, but there are voices of optimism. Correspondent Richard Blystone helps us hear one of them.
Well, having left his voice is hoarse, he says, from something that's not really his style, joining the cheers as a crowd tore down a statue of Saddam.
The basic problem, really, is that people have been imprisoned psychologically, mentally, for 35 years. And therefore, I think coming out from this tunnel, seeing light, we hope that they will be able to act constructively for a future.
Political science professor Gaylan Ramiz, 10 years in the foreign ministry, 6 months in prison, has lived most of Iraq's bloody modern history and is still an optimist.
We have our Islamic religion, which teaches us human dignity. We have our language, which teaches us what beauty is and what art is. We have our history, which tells us what our grandfathers were able to fulfill. Our culture is a constructive tool to build a future upon. Iraq has more than 7,000 years of history, and therefore we can assume that we must have picked up some experience from all that history. I honestly think no nation, no race, no religion can claim that we have always been democratic and all been humane. Europe, even modern Europe, had more tyrants than the Arabs had in the 20th century. We had never had a tyrant who could be equated with Adolf Hitler that will send 6 million people the gas chamber, because our culture could not produce a scientific ethnic cleansing. This is a Western concept. I don't believe really Iraq has to be a Switzerland to be democratic. The sociological foundation of political power that will sustain democracy exists in Arab culture. If the Americans are true liberators, they should not mind if people tell them go after liberation is done. But the Iraqi people, I think, are realistic enough. And they expect that American troops in Iraq to be for a temporary basis. The Iraqi people understand also that this liberation from Saddam Hussein could not have come easily from them, because he was a tyrant, and a tyrant that I say with a little shame myself, a successful tyrant to a great deal, really. He had demonized the Iraqi soul. We need an Iraqi leadership that can tell the Iraqi people, don't think of the past. If there is any problem of the past we cannot solve, let us not force ourselves to solve it now, because humane issues, psychological issues cannot be solved in the present. Things that we can explain, let us explain. But things that we cannot explain, let us close the books on them.
So the professor's seminar ends with a chapter yet to be written. Richard Blystone, CNN, Baghdad.
Our coverage of the war in Iraq continues in 2 minutes. I'm Fionnuala Sweeney in London. Stay with CNN.
The dramatic rescue of the 7 POWs. And CNN's Bob Franken was there first, as it happened.
With a very happy, successful recovery.
For the best in real reporting, stay with CNN, the most trusted name in news. You decided. Once again, CNN is #1. For trust and experience, Americans choose CNN as the most credible news source. More than MSNBC or Fox News. More than any network, newspaper, or magazine. CNN is the most trusted name in news.
CNN takes you into the whole story.
CNN has confirmed that attack a missile or a rocket.
No one gets you closer than...
Trouble with civilians in the town of Mosul, and how a 12-year-old Iraqi boy became a symbol of war to the entire world. All that and more in the hour ahead. We'll take a break first, get the latest news headlines, and then we continue.
Oh, hey, hi, I'm Digger. Don't mind me, I'm just a dermatophyte. You know, a nail infection. All I want is to get in here and live under your nail. You can't get me with clippers or those surface treatments you try on your own. I'm in too deep in your nail bed. I'll make myself comfortable, invite a few friends. Settle in.
Do you have thick, discolored, or flaky nails? Millions of people do. It may be caused by an active live infection. That's why you should ask your doctor about prescription-only Lamisil. Unlike surface treatments, Lamisil is a pill that works through the bloodstream to target and attack the infection at its source, underneath the nail. In fact, you can start to see clearer, healthier nails in just 3 months. Lamisil isn't for people with liver or kidney problems. Barely serious side effects in the liver or serious skin reactions have occurred, so your doctor may do blood tests. Other side effects including headache, diarrhea, indigestion, and rash were generally mild. Ask your doctor about Lamisil. It's the #1 brand for treating infected nails. Once daily Lamisil tablets. Get your nail infection where it grows.
The dramatic rescue of the 7 POWs. And CNN's Bob Franken was there first, as it happened.
Ended with a very happy, successful recovery.
For the best in real reporting, stay with CNN, the most trusted name in news.
Wolf Blitzer takes you inside the war in Iraq.
Other U.S. troops on the ground in western Iraq. CNN has reporters covering every facet of this story.
Wolf Blitzer, experience you can trust only on CNN.
Hello, I'm Frederica Whitfield in the CNN newsroom with a check of the headlines at this hour. U.S. officials tell CNN the former chief of Saddam Hussein's intelligence service, Farouk Hijazi, is in Syria. Hijazi is now an Iraqi diplomat, but U.S. officials are expressing anger at Syria for making him welcome. He's suspected of involvement in the 1993 plot to kill the first President Bush. Earlier, U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell said the U.S. has no plans to wage war on Syria. The U.S. has rejected Syria's denials of charges it's been hiding chemical weapons and permitting Iraqi fugitives to flee over the border. U.S. Central Command confirms Abu Abbas is in custody tonight after more than 18 years as a fugitive. Abbas is accused of masterminding the taking of the Achille Lauro cruise ship. Palestinian terrorists shot an elderly American Jew, Leon Klinghoffer, then dumped him overboard in his wheelchair. Modesto, California police say the 2 bodies found along the San Francisco Bay are still unidentified. It could be days or even weeks until they learn whether the bodies are those of missing substitute teacher Lacey Peterson and the baby boy she was carrying when she disappeared in December. Those are some of the headlines. More coverage of the war in Iraq next.
Well, for a war that's seemingly over, a lot of pieces in play tonight. We begin the hour with the capture of Abu Abbas. He has been a most wanted man since 1985, out of reach for a good portion of that time, living in Iraq. When Iraq fell into American hands, so did Abbas. CNN's Nick Robertson is following that and more and joins us again from Baghdad. Nick?
Hello, Aaron. Well, according to Palestinian sources that we've been in touch with from Baghdad, they say that Abu Abbas left Baghdad, left his house on Sunday, drove to the Syrian border, was turned back by Syrian border guards, and then headed back towards Baghdad. About 50 miles west of Baghdad, he was arrested by U.S. Special Forces. Now, Abbas had been living in Iraq since the early 1990s. He'd gone back to Gaza in 1996, has spent about 4 years there. Then when the Palestinian Intifada started, he returned again to Iraq and has been living in Baghdad for about the last 3 years. And he was very aware that if the U.S. forces, if coalition forces invaded Iraq, then he was very liable for capture, and certainly aware that he was wanted on charges of murder in the United States. Aaron?
One more question on him, and then I want to move on to the meeting outside Nasiriyah. Was there no safe haven for him anywhere else in the Arab world, given the run-up and the inevitability of the war? Was there no place else he could have gone?
That's not clear. He would have been unlikely to have found a welcome home in Iran. He would have not been particularly welcome if he tried to go to the northern Kurdish area of Iraq. Turkey would seem to have been off limits given Turkey's ties. Syria, that's a very debatable question of perhaps why he chose not to go to Syria any earlier. May have felt that he was, for certain reasons, unwelcome there. Jordan out of the question. Kuwait, obviously, Saudi Arabia as well. Yeah. So perhaps he had run out of options and Baghdad the only place for him, Aaron.
All right, we got a glimpse today of both the process and the complexity of the problem outside Nasiriyah today, this meeting of the Americans and with the Americans and the protests as well.
It was, and certainly the reaction in Nasiriyah from the Shiite community is symptomatic of the broader feelings within the Shia community. We were in Najaf yesterday. Najaf is the holiest Shia city in the whole of Iraq, in the whole of the world, and that is where the heart of the Shia community is. And we talked with 3 different Shia leaders there, and while there is an intense power struggle going on between the different factions within the Shia community, they are united in one thing, and that is that they want to present a united front at this time. The reason they say they are 60% of the community in Iraq, they believe that their political voice should be commensurate with that, and they believe, and this is what we heard from a number of different Shia leaders, that the United States is trying to divide the Shia community in order to conquer them, and they feel that there should be, or at least the Shia community, the religious part of the community, the extremely religious part of the community we talk to, believe that there should be a religious leader, a cleric, ruling Iraq. That is their view, and that's why we've seen these protests against the meeting in Nasiriyah. Also, it's been very interesting here in Baghdad to listen to the people here. Many people here were not even aware that this meeting was going on in Nasiriyah, this meeting to form a new government, or at least begin to talk about who might be represented in that new government. And what we heard from people in Nasiriyah, what we've heard from people in Baghdad is that if there is going to be a new government in Iraq, and certainly everyone here hopes there will be soon, because they know that is the best way to get back to some sense of normality and get their lives back going again, is that it should be Iraqi people and not ex-Iraqis as they see it, people who have been in exile for a number of years, not those people coming back. They don't believe that they have suffered in the same way that the people here have, and therefore they don't have the moral authority and the right to be in positions of power here, Aaron.
Nick, thank you. Nick Robertson in Baghdad. It's early morning there, Wednesday morning. Many, maybe most of the young American men and women who fought in Iraq had never done any soldiering before. Now, with the soldiering largely behind them, they find themselves doing other things they've never done before either. Of course, putting the country back on its feet is something almost no one has done before. Here's CNN's Christiane Amanpour.
From fighting force to restoring civil order, the U.S. Marines in Baghdad are trying to make that transition and help Iraq get back on its feet.
Easy, let's do it. Okay, sure.
Here, the Marines have brought together many engineers and administrators from the Ministry of Water. Restoring that basic amenity is a priority. The U.S. Marine Corps wrote the book on restoring civil order after wars. It's called the Small Wars Manual, and they've never done anything this big before. Baghdad alone is a city of 5 million people. It's going to be, they say, a gigantic task.
I have no idea. I've never done this before, and but we're chipping away at it. We're making great progress today.
Colonel McCoy's Marines are also now stepping into some police work. Here, stopping a robbery at the Iraqi Central Bank.
These guys had brand new bills, dollars, whatever they call them over, dinar, I believe they call them. They had stacks of dinar in their pockets, which were brand new, and they came out of the vault, which was on fire and just recently been blown. So, 2 and 2 together, they're robbers. Come on, get up. Get up. Basically, we're sending a message that, hey, you can't do this anymore in Iraq. It's over.
And that's certainly what most residents want to hear. Every day, from just about everyone we meet, we hear urgent demands for more security. Meantime, the Baghdad police force is still trying to organize itself for the first foot patrols onto the streets of their newly liberated city. Some have this message for the U.S.
Iraqi people don't want the Americans to stay here.
But why not?
They came here to liberation, okay? Not to stay here.
It's a message that's not lost on Colonel McCoy and his team.
One day we're a liberator, the next day we're an occupying force, which nobody wants to be occupied. That can be 6 months or it can be 6 days. A lot of it has to do with whether we're perceived as ugly Americans, whether we try and present ourselves as authority figures, and the key to that is getting control back into the Iraqi people's hands.
Fresh from that robbery that continued after the Marines left, Lieutenant Edward Langelo has a blunter message for the Iraqis.
You need to get up. You, the Iraqi people, need to get up and start taking charge of your own nation. I mean, America did that a long time ago, and look where we are today.
Perhaps reflecting the U.S. administration's vision of trying to recreate the Middle East in its own image. Christiane Amanpour, CNN, Baghdad.
At some point, of course, at what point we don't know, the American troops in Iraq will begin going home, and it could be that some other American troops will begin going home as well. CNN's Jamie McIntyre has more now from the Pentagon. Jamie, good evening.
Good evening, Aaron. Well, suffice it to say it's going to be a much different neighborhood around Iraq. No matter what happens over the next couple of months, the U.S. is going to have a significant presence in Iraq, but they may turn out they need fewer troops in other countries, particularly other countries that are not so comfortable with a U.S. presence. Now that the U.S. military is free from the burden of patrolling the northern and southern no-fly zones, the Pentagon is completely rethinking how it will position its forces in and around a free Iraq. With Iraq's military essentially destroyed and disarmament well underway, the U.S. has far less need for 2 bases that supported 12 years of no-fly zone patrols: Incirlik Air Base in Turkey and Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia.
We have shut down Operation Northern Watch. The assets that were there for that purpose have been redeployed. We have not made final decisions with respect to the footprint of the United States in that part of the world and won't for some months.
Both Turkey and Saudi Arabia have been reluctant allies. Turkey blocked the deployment of the U.S. Army's 4th Infantry Division, which effectively denied the U.S. a northern front in the initial phase of the war. And Turkey only allowed limited combat overflights of its territory. Saudi Arabia insisted publicly it would not allow offensive airstrikes from its soil, but did quietly permit some U.S. Special Operations troops and aircraft to operate from forward bases. And it allowed the U.S. to run the air war out of a high-tech U.S. command center south of Riyadh. But now that the U.S. will likely have a military presence in Iraq for years to come, and enjoy stronger alliances with other Gulf states like Kuwait and Qatar, the U.S. is reevaluating how many troops, ships, and planes it needs in the Persian Gulf region. But even as it thinks about cutbacks in the future, for now more troops are pouring in, although the mix has been adjusted to reflect the new missions of humanitarian aid and searching for weapons of mass destruction. The 1st Armored Division from Germany is deploying with its tanks but without artillery. And the 1st Cavalry Division from Fort Hood, Texas, isn't going, with the exception of one unit, military police, which are still desperately needed in Iraq. Aaron?
Jamie, and we'll bring General Clark in on this in a moment, too. The decision on the bases, particularly in Saudi Arabia, which caused a lot of problems to the Saudis as well, is that a unilateral decision by the U.S. government? The Secretary said, we haven't decided what our footprint is going to be in the region. I assume the Saudis have something to say about this.
Well, the opposite will be done in conjunction with Saudi Arabia, but Saudi Arabia has always wanted the United States to have the smallest footprint possible. Their policy toward the United States has been essentially the U.S. can do whatever it can do without calling much attention to itself. The U.S. will no doubt still want to have a presence there, and they'll want to keep that high-tech command center, the Prince Sultan Air Base. That's a very expensive and high-tech facility. But they may be able to move a lot of the other planes out, especially with new allies in Qatar and plenty of places to operate in Kuwait, perhaps even with some bases in Iraq. So they'll be able to reduce the footprint there and probably in Turkey as well. And to both of those governments, that may be a relief.
Jamie, thank you. Jamie McIntyre at the Pentagon. Quickly over to General Clark. Perhaps this is a bit harsh, but to a certain extent, the Saudi position has been, we actually like having these Americans here. We like the protection, but they're like hired help. We don't necessarily want to see them out in public. Untenable or just pragmatic?
Well, I think it's pragmatic for the Saudis. I think it's something the American forces have to put up with. There have been frictions for years over this, and many of the Americans have felt like somewhat of hired help. The relations are great at the top, though. The generals and the admirals and the colonels who deal with the Saudis are very well treated. It's just at the bottom, and it's just the facts of the situation. There will be readjustments there, and there's no doubt about it, and there may be force structure changes as well. But, you know, I think in all of these considerations, we have to remember that this is set against a broader vision of the Middle East. And so it's not clear yet how that's going to work out, and it's not clear what the requirement for forces or facilities in the region will be. It's much too early. The administration's claims that it has no plans to go against Syria notwithstanding, there's a lot left that could happen in the region as a result of the instabilities and pressures set up by the U.S. action.
Help me and help us understand something here. Why is it important, if you think it is important, that the Americans keep a presence in Saudi Arabia or in the region? How does that contribute to the national security of the United States?
Well, in the first place, any country in which we have troops stationed, we have a certain amount of influence. We're not paying for that commitment in full dollar terms. The Saudis are actually putting a lot of the money up themselves. They built the facilities, provide the fuel and all that sort of thing. But it's an occasion for dialogue. It's an opportunity to work together on other common problems. These military forces are in actual practice great diplomats. They're the tangible evidence of U.S. interest abroad, and they're the ones that merit the special attention from the government. So keeping them there keeps a link open, builds a bridge to the Saudis, especially to the royal family and the people at the top, and gives us a certain amount of sway. provided, of course, that they still want the forces there.
General, thank you. General Wes Clark. On to other matters. There's been a tremendous excitement over the 7 rescued American POWs, as there should be. We don't want to lose sight of the first American to be rescued in Iraq, Private Jessica Lynch. There's still an enormous amount of mystery surrounding Private Lynch, including how she sustained the injuries she continues to recover from. But we're beginning to learn more about her dramatic rescue, at least, carried out, it seems, not just with brute force, but also with old-fashioned spy work. The story from Pentagon correspondent Barbara Starr.
CNN has learned that just hours before Private First Class Jessica Lynch was rescued by special forces, the CIA sent a trusted Iraqi operative already on the agency payroll into the hospital with a secret video camera provided by the Pentagon. His mission? To tape the building's interiors, critical information for planning the daring raid, a rescue the team would then tape themselves as it unfolded. In the 72 hours before the April 1st rescue, the U.S. intelligence community began to hear whispers of Jessica Lynch's location. At least 2 enemy prisoners of war offered some information indicating she had been at another location in Nasiriyah, but none of that could be verified. Then a local Iraqi man informed nearby Marines that Jessica Lynch was at the hospital. His information needed to be verified. But the CIA and the military were already working frantically on a number of leads, all pointing to the hospital in Nasiriyah. The Defense Intelligence Agency obtained hospital blueprints for the commando team. It was then decided to risk sending in the Iraqi operative with a hidden video camera. The rescue team was actually a group of special forces formed to hunt and capture regime leaders. They were diverted to this mission. It was Navy SEALs that went into the hospital, while Army Rangers provided outside security and the Marines staged a diversion. At the same time, Air Force Special Forces were waiting outside to take Jessica Lynch to safety. The mission went off without a hitch. Indeed, by the time the Special Forces team got there, most Iraqi fighters had deserted the hospital, and the role of the CIA operative would remain hidden until now. Barbara Starr, CNN, The Pentagon.
Next on Newsnight, we'll talk with former Assistant Secretary of State, the State Department's chief spokesman at the time, Jamie Rubin. But we'll take a break first. Our coverage continues in a moment.
There must be 50 ways the AeroBed saves the day. Like reason 19, you've got the guest room, but no guest bed. Number 3, your guest bed invites your guest to go away. Relax. Just plug in the AeroBed, push the button, and you have a comfortable, adjustable extra bed in less than 1 minute. The new pump is recessed and is 30% more powerful with quadra-coil construction for a smoother surface. It's even adjustable with our exclusive one-touch comfort control. And it can hold up to 650 pounds. Plus, it stores away in seconds. And now you can get the new and improved AeroBed at the same low price.
Call now to get the AeroBed for just 3 easy payments of only $33.
Plus, get this free carry bag and get our 30-night money-back guarantee.
Buy now. That's just 3 payments of $33 or visit a fine retail store near you.
How many ways will you use your AeroBed?
CNN Today, history cleaned out, priceless treasures looted inside the search for Iraq's lost artifacts. Plus, Colin Powell's wife Alma on her husband's role in the war in Iraq. And new book on American Morning with Paula Zahn. CNN Today, 7 Eastern.
To Damascus now, a city now increasingly on the radar screen for a number of reasons. For most of the day, the Bush administration seemed to throttle back the rhetoric where Syria is concerned, but then tonight came another potentially inflammatory development. CNN's Sheila McVicker has been working on the story, and she joins us from Damascus. Sheila?
Good morning, Aaron. Well, U.S. administration officials are saying that a former senior Iraqi intelligence chief, a man named Farouk Hijazi, may in fact be in Syria. Now, Farouk Hijazi most recently served as Iraq's ambassador to Tunisia. Before that, he was Iraqi ambassador to Turkey. He was also believed by U.S. administration officials to perhaps have been involved in the plot, the early 1990s plot, to assassinate the first president, George Bush. He was also Saddam Hussein's point man with Osama bin Laden in the late 1980s, a contact which began at the instigation of bin Laden at a time when the United States was making nice with the Taliban in Afghanistan. Bin Laden thought he might get kicked out. He was looking for someplace else to go. And it was Hijazi who Saddam Hussein designated as the person for bin Laden to talk to. Those contacts are believed to have foundered on grounds of mutual suspicion and distrust. But the story this morning is that, according to U.S. administration officials, he may be somewhere here in Syria, traveling apparently on a diplomatic passport. As I said, he was Iraq's ambassador to Tunisia. The question, of course, is whether or not he is here, whether or not the U.S. has any interest in him. One would presume if they suspect him of involvement in that assassination plot, they might, though he has been a public figure elsewhere for a number of years. And of course we will have to wait and see what the Syrians have to say, who have so far consistently denied any knowledge of any senior Iraqi officials here. Aaron?
Well, that answers that question, whether the Syrian government has commented on that. We'll let that go through the day and see where we end up tomorrow. Did the government today have anything to say about this beating it's been taking over the last 4 days, 5 days by the American government?
It's been going on longer than that. Just the tempo has stepped up over the course of the last 5 days. I mean, you might call it megaphone diplomacy. They're hearing all these messages, multiple messages about multiple subjects, whether it's, you know, the pipeline, weapons, fighters, people who might be here, you know, support for terrorist organizations. There's a welter of messages out there, most of them, many of them delivered in fairly strong, fairly clear language. And the Syrian position on this is, whoa, wait a second, how about some dialogue here? We don't want to have a problem with the United States. We know that there are issues, but we would like to be able to sit down and talk to the United States. And from the Syrian perspective, Syria has been an ally of the United States in the war on terror, an important ally, with whom who basically achieved some important successes in the war on terror. Syria has also in the past been an ally with the United States against Iraq. So Syria is hearing all these messages and wondering, what is the United States really asking for? What is this really all about? And I think the confusion is growing. Their sense of how to respond to this is also sort of sliding a little bit all over the map. They don't know whether to be defensive, to go on the offensive, to go on a charm offensive, or to sit back and sort of take it until it becomes a little bit more clear. To go back on the subject of Hijazi for just half a sec, what's important about the Hijazi thing is the question of intelligence, which is one of the things that the U.S. has been beating up the Syrians on over the course of the last number of days. There has been a sense, certainly in the community here, the diplomatic community here, that there has been very fragmentary intelligence. The question now is whether the U.S. has got something solid. Aaron?
Sheila, thank you. Sheila McVicker, who's in Damascus. Jamie Rubin is here with us in New York, former Assistant Secretary of State. I have a mechanical question. If you're carrying a diplomatic passport from a government that no longer is the passport itself valid?
Well, until the new government is chosen, that passport is probably accepted by most people, yeah.
Okay. You get the feeling the administration is playing sort of tough cop with Syria. There's a new sheriff in town in the Middle East, and you better shape up. Is that the game?
Yeah, I think megaphone diplomacy is probably the right word. We've had a lot of trouble with Syria over the years, whether it's terrorism, weapons of mass destruction, operations in Lebanon, and now we have this new set of issues related to the collapse of Saddam Hussein. Traditionally, these issues have been dealt with through intelligence channels, as Sheila was mentioning, where we've had cooperation, or through diplomatic channels with high-level meetings with the top Syrian officials in which we get them to do something we want them to do. So here we have the United States succeeding, liberating Iraq, sending this powerful message to the Arab world, and I think some people in the government, our government, think that now is the right time